So now that we have a better understanding of what Math Talk is and what it looks like and some strategies, the next step is really for us just to incorporate it into our classroom, right? We know what it is, we know what it looks like, but how, how do we do it? So here are some tools and strategies and sources that may help. Now, keep in mind that I am a general education teacher, but I did teach special education essentials, and I was also a special education ICR teacher for about 10 years. And so I understand the importance of when you receive resources and strategies and tips and things like that. They're generalized, right? Only you know your classroom. You're the expert of your class. So the resources that I'm sharing with you, I've created as Google Slides so you can edit them in any way you need to in order to suit your class. So the first thing I find beneficial with my students is to actually have a math talk discussion with your class and role play what it looks like. I'm going to share my screen, and this is also linked, but this is what I present to my students to help them better get an idea of what Math Talk looks like and kind of guides them through the process. So we go over this Google Slide presentation. We talk about what it looks like, all right? Talk about what it isn't. We talk about our code of conduct. You have to have an agreement of everyone's going to participate, stay on topic, be kind. So really getting an idea of what it looks like. And then I like to talk to students about why Math Talk is important. And I like to use the analogy of a house and school. And I always tell them, hey, tell me one way to get from your house to school. And they tell me a way, and I allow different students to share how they would get from their house to school. Then I ask, is there a different way to get there? Do you know any other ways? And sometimes we might even pull it up on Google Maps or MapQuest and actually look at the variety of ways they can get from their house to school, really trying to reinforce a point that there's usually more than one way to get to the same destination. So I tie this into math problems, letting them know that it's a lot like traveling. There are many ways to get to the same place. When we're solving problems, you might solve a problem differently than I do, or differently than your classmates do. And that's what Math Talk allows us to do. It allows us to share, right? So if you get the same answer, share how you got there, right? If you use the same process, repeat it in your own words. That really helps to reinforce the learning. And I really try to sum it up, letting the kids know everyone learns differently. And Math Talk really helps us to understand problems and different ways to solve them, right? I tell my students all the time, I learn so much from them because when I look at a problem, I'm like, okay, this is the way I'll solve it. And then they say, oh, I looked at it like this. And I'm like, wow, I never looked at it like that. And so you don't really get those opportunities if you don't do the Math Talk, right? So that's why I find validity in this. I also introduce the sentence starters to the students, and I'll show you where I keep these at. So that way they have a basis for talking, and I'll discuss that more in a minute. And then we just kind of role play. So we go through and have a scenario. And so here our scenario is Harry Potter thinks the answer is 8. So I'd have the students have their sentence starters, and if they agree, they can go back to one of the comments, I agree because, and explain why they agree, or I disagree because. And I tried to keep the problems with just adding or subtracting just to keep it low level, because honestly, the point isn't really the math, the point is the Math Talk. Because this is a Google slide, when you make a copy, you can change any of these slides again to suit your students, right? So this is just kind of a guideline of how I begin when I'm working with my students. Another thing I really like to do is, as I mentioned before, provide sentence starters. And the second thing that is linked there are our sentence starters and our Math Talk for our students. So I'm going to share it with you here. But I have lots of different ones. You can figure out which one works best for your students. This one is typically when I have a student leading a group. So if I have a leader giving them this guideline so they can know how to lead a group in a discussion. Here are some more conversation sentence starters that are a little bit longer. These are the bookmark versions, so you can actually print these out, cut them out, and have the kids use them daily. And then guiding questions for math. And I actually use this myself as a teacher. So these questions actually help me to get them to talk about math more. So you can use those, feel free to use those yourself. And then I've adapted it. So if your students are a little bit lower and you know that they're going to struggle with having a longer list of sentence starters, maybe you can just start them with 3 each. And again, I have the bookmarks here for that. And the great thing about this as well is it's a Google slide. So you adapt it and modify it to whatever your students need. Again, you're the expert in your classroom, so you really know what your students need. The third thing we can really do to help students is to model what you want them to say during instruction. And I always like to look for every opportunity to model what they need to be saying. Sometimes I even use the sentence starters to say, oh, I agree with your answer because, or I got the same answer by doing this instead. I also ask them those guiding questions. I'm like, did anybody get the same answer using a different method? So the more you can model what Math Talk looks like in your classroom, the better your students will be able to do that. So try to look for every opportunity to model what you want the students to do. Then you can just make sure to give them opportunities to practice, right, as much as possible. While we know that we need to provide direct instruction, and we know that especially when students are learning a new concept, they might struggle with the Math Talk. You really need to try to take as many opportunities as possible to allow them to do this, whether it's during the warm up or during one of the activities, because we know it's only going to work if you're consistently utilizing it. If you only pull out those sentence starters once a week, once a month, they will never get it. But if you get them to pull them out every day, say, hey, we're doing a warm up, let's practice our Math Talk. Hey, this activity seems like they can do Math Talk with this. So try to find ways to embed it into at least a little bit of the lesson every single day until you get to the point where you can embed it more and more. Finally, just be patient, all right? Students are not going to do Math Talk perfectly overnight, not even the next day or a couple months down the road, right? There are going to be times when they just fly through the answers. There are going to be times when they just sit there quietly and not talk to each other, and even times when they're talking about things that aren't related to math. So you really have to be patient with them and patient with yourself. It really takes a while to get the hang of Math Talk, and it looks different in every classroom you go into. You might see an example of how it looks somewhere, but those, are their students. Your students might look a little bit different, and that's okay. In the end, we know that it's critical to the learning process and growth of our students, right? We're preparing them for the future. So their ability to talk about math increases their learning, right? It also lets us know how much they know. So really the bottom line is that Math Talk can work if we model it, practice it, and provide our students with the resources and opportunities to use it.